All right, I would like to welcome everyone to the Environmental Commission for the month of August. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Could you take a roll call?
Commissioner Beely?
Here.
Commissioner Hurtko?
Here.
Commissioner Horn?
Here.
Chairman Davidson, he might still be planning to arrive. Commissioner Kaufman did inform me that he is sick and would not be attending. Commissioner Rafak?
Here.
Commissioner Riggs?
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Here.
All right, next item on the agenda is our approval of minutes. Ask our commission, have they reviewed the minutes and any comments or approval?
And just
Motion.
on number 9, it says that I, Dr. Hurtko, discussed the testing requested of the Des Plaines River. Actually, I didn't request the testing. The testing was performed by the United States Geographic Survey, and the testing happened over a 5-year span, being presented in 2017. If we could add 2017, that would be terrific.
So the revisions requested are discuss the testing performed, not requested, and the last sentence, this testing happened over a 5-year span.
Being presented in 2017.
Being presented in 2017.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Any other comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I think someone needs to make the motion first.
Move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Horn.
A second.
Thank you, Commissioner Bailey.
As amended, by the way.
Thank you. So approved as amended. All right, next on our agenda item, citizens to be heard. On the agenda, in honor to our commissioner, our chair, Gary Davison, I'd like to follow his policy, and we will conduct the meeting as always, that if anyone has any comments throughout the presentation, they're welcome to come forward. So number 4, discussion.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our meeting. As always, I will start off with a quick update about the study that's being performed and a schedule update. So just a reminder to everyone, we did complete phase 1 in January of 2019. The recommendation from phase 1 was to advance 5 options for further evaluation during phase 2. Those are the 5 options that we are currently studying: the Kankakee River, the Illinois River, and 3 variations on Lake Michigan water. This is a map just to remind everyone that the water sources are coming from all locations surrounding the city of Joliet. Again, just remind everyone about what our goals are during the phase 2 study. We are going to determine the extent of improvements required for each of those water source alternatives, and based on that, we can then calculate costs. We want to further refine and prioritize decision criteria, continued stakeholder engagement by implementing the public relations plan that was adopted from phase 1, and then providing all the information necessary to the City Council and Environmental Commission so that an alternative source can be selected by the end of 2019. These are a summary of items that we've completed since the last Environmental Commission meeting. The request for information for potential water suppliers was issued, and we did have a notice of intents were received on July 11th. Those are now being worked on by the potential suppliers, and we'll be receiving those packets August 22nd. The city held a regional water supply meeting on July 16th. This was a meeting of potential regional partners or customers from communities in the surrounding area. We did prepare and hand out a questionnaire that has questions to try and gauge the interest of other communities in the area to potentially participate in a regional solution. I've requested those be submitted by September 1st so that we can have that information to be included with the Phase 2 study. We did receive the qualification packages for the independent cost review proposals, and a meeting was held to review those qualification packages. The project team met with IEPA on July 23rd to provide them with an ongoing status update and discuss the river water sampling that we've been doing per their requirements. We also did sampling of Lake Michigan water from the Hammond water treatment plant on July 24th, and also completed another round of river water sampling on July 25th. So that was our third round of river water sampling. The workshop, the joint workshop from the City Council and the Environmental Commission was held on July 30th. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the meeting. And then the project representatives from the city, including the mayor, city manager, and corporation council, met with the city of Hammond to confirm their interest in participating potentially in a Joliet solution, and that participation would be allowing the use of their right-of-way for what we're now calling the new Indiana intake. So they did confirm that there is still interest, whether that be working directly with the city of Joliet to come to an agreement to allow for an intake and transmission mains to be constructed through Hammond. The items we're currently working on that will be completed next month. We're going to do another round of sampling in mid-August. We are going to receive the RFI information from potential water suppliers. We have another conference call with IEPA scheduled for August 15th, just to further discuss with them the study so that they're well informed of what we're doing. And then we're also preparing a technical memorandum on non-revenue water reduction, which will be presented at a subsequent environmental commission meeting.
Allison, do we know how many entities are preparing RFIs for the 22nd?
Yeah, so the way the RFIs, we had two different types of response. We had from the known water source suppliers, such as DuPage Water Commission, City of Chicago, and then also we were trying to gauge interest from public-private partnerships and potentially other interested parties to see if there was interest in other parties being involved in the ultimate solution. So, the information being collected from the known water source suppliers will be utilized in the Phase 2 study, and then the information that we're gathering from other, operations groups, financing groups, that will be utilized then probably as we move into a conceptual design phase next year. So kind of think you were going back to what you had requested, last fall, is we kind of wanted to put it out to the world and see what options might be out there. So that was the goal of the RFI. And I think Teresa might have numbers on how many submittals we received.
There was, beyond the potential suppliers, there were 5 public-private partnerships.
So there are 5 public-private partnerships. So we'll provide that information at a subsequent meeting. Once we, those were just the notice of interest, notice of intent to submit. So we'll see who ends up actually submitting information. And it's not a binding proposal from anyone. It's just information that we will utilize in completing the Phase 2 study.
Thank you.
So just a quick summary of the joint workshop that was held on the 30th. I got a lot of positive feedback from council members and members of the public that saw that there was a lot of value in having that workshop. So I hope everyone here felt that it was a valuable use of time. We, to summarize what was presented at that workshop, we had the group presentation where we provided an update on the Phase 2 study alternatives. I know a lot of that was repetitive for the Environmental Commission, but it was important for the City Council to hear that. And we also then broke into small groups where we had question and answer sessions specifically on each water source alternative. As stated at the workshop, all of the written and verbal questions were compiled, and that's now available on the website. So, and it was that workshop was also televised on Channel 6, so that information is all out there for the public now to, if people weren't able to attend, the information is out there now for them to view. Okay, so talking about public relations, once again, we've been out there, staff has been out there trying to take the message to the people where they are, going to be anyway. So this past month, we attended the Joliet Farmers Market. We also hosted Slammers Water Conservation Day with the county, July 21st. Unfortunately, it did rain out, but we had a lot of fun before the game and for the first half inning when they played. So we're already talking to the county about another opportunity to partner on an event like this for next year. And then Amy Wagner and I attended Kids Fest, which was very well attended. I think this was probably the event where we had the most outreach, talking to residents and putting temporary tattoos on quite a few kids. So the message, the branding, I guess you'd say, it was out there. We also have upcoming events. This kind of closes out our summer festival campaign. There's more farmers market opportunities, the Joliet prison break-in August 24th, and then a chamber event in September. And some ongoing public relations activities. We have the billboards. If you drive around town, if you've seen them, we were heavily promoting the Water Conservation Day in July. In August, we have more water conservation messages on the city's billboards. There were 14 social media posts in July, and there's 12 scheduled for August. We've increased the number of e-blasts we're sending. As requested, we send out an e-blast prior to every Environmental Commission meeting so that anyone who's on the stakeholder list can be reminded to attend. Also have done a couple radio interviews on WJOL on the afternoon and morning, promoting water conservation as well as informing residents about the study in general. And then also, as requested at the last Environmental Commission meetings, all of the future, including this meeting, all future Environmental Commission meetings are going to be televised on Channel 6. So welcome to everyone at home who's watching us if this is your first meeting. I'm going to let Janet talk about the survey if you have just any information to present about what we're doing with that.
So far, we have received 427 responses to the survey in English and 14 in Spanish. I think that this is a really good response rate. We're hoping just to gain information from folks that if they're aware of this study taking place. And then at the end of this study, we want to do a follow-up survey to see that we can gain more participation and give people more information about the selected source and find out what their opinions are for the next phase moving forward. We will be analyzing the survey results we have received so far. Responses in the last week have kind of been trickling in, one here and there. So I want to be able to present all of those results to you next month and then continue to keep this survey open and let people continue to respond as they get the information. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. So looking ahead to next month, the monthly educational topic will be on climate change and how that might impact the water sources. And then, as I previously mentioned, we'll be presenting the draft technical memorandum on water loss reduction. So I know water loss has been a topic we've been talking about frequently in these meetings, so we'll be presenting that memorandum. In the bigger picture, what are our next steps? The week of November 4th, we want to schedule one-on-one meetings with City Council and Environmental Commission members. We'll have study results at that time to discuss with you. That will then be publicly presented at the joint workshop that we're going to have in lieu of the regularly scheduled Environmental Commission meeting on November 12th. Then we'd be seeking a recommendation from the Environmental Commission on December 10th, and that would be presented to the City Council on December 17th. I guess I'll just pause at this time if there's any questions in general about the study. Okay. All right. We'll move on to the next agenda item then, which is the education topic number 11, and I'll turn it over to Teresa.
Okay, so education topic number 11 was sent out. It's on emerging contaminants and treatment. And so that was sent out to you guys, and I wanted to just open it up to questions. It had an overview of emerging contaminants that are out there and what emerging contaminants there are, as well as treatment case studies that have been done. So I guess with that, if there's any questions about the educational topic.
Might as well have been in Greek.
It is very technical. And it really is part of the landscape of what's out there is this idea that an emerging contaminant is one that we know exists. It hasn't been studied, and a lot of times it's only been discovered because the laboratory science that's behind it has allowed it to be tested at very low levels, the nanograms per million versus the parts per million. So it's evolving. Research has to be done to figure out what's effective, what's not effective, and it's present everywhere in every source. So it's ongoing, and this is part of why the sampling's being done, because these are emerging contaminants that we are sampling for in the river water sources and in Lake Michigan. Okay.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and turn it over then to Jeff Freeman, who will do a presentation on short-term groundwater strategies. Oh, I'm sorry.
Bruce Renwick, 1508 West Acres Road, Joliet. I guess I'm a little disappointed that we haven't been able, is there some way we can make this information available to the public?
The education topics are emailed to those stakeholders who have requested it, and it's also available on the website.
Okay, so that's on the website.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, good evening. Jeff Freeman is part of the consulting team here. As you all know, the process of selecting an alternative water source takes a little bit of time, and then ultimately the time to implement it will be out there. We've targeted overall that about 10 years is the time frame likely to be needed to work through the implementation plan. So tonight's discussion will be, well, what are we going to do essentially for the next 10 years with our waterworks system and being able to meet the demands throughout that system as they likely grow. So in summary, the goals of the short-term groundwater strategy is to look at how we can maintain our existing wells. There's certainly a significant investment in the wells. Past modeling that we've done with the Illinois State Water Survey has indicated that they should be sustainable through 2030 overall. And then for all the alternatives that we're talking about, we've determined that they're likely a good backup source of supply for the city as well. So we want to take that into account when we're planning the next 10 years, but certainly take it into account in the long term as well. Growth is anticipated in Joliet. Perhaps it's not at the same pace that it was pre-recession, but it is coming back, and with that, there is a very good chance that water demands will increase. And as water demands increase, then the wells will need to keep up with that demand. The city, if you did not know, has a robust well rehabilitation program. They're doing a great job of getting around each one of their wells and being proactive overall. Unfortunately, even with that, as with other community, things happen. So we're going to talk about how they track things, look at water levels, look at the specific capacity overall, and then as the overall plan to manage the specific capacity of the wells the best that we can to keep those water levels above the aquifer such that, again, the aquifer continues to be sustainable for 2030, up until 2030. If you have any questions along the way, certainly interrupt me. Probably best to get it out there as we go. So as indicated, the population in the city of Joliet is projected to continue to grow. The Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning is the planning agency within the region that does the population projections, and essentially the city, as well as the study, has adopted that as the overall planning guide. Right now, the population, or back in 2017, was around 150,000 people, probably about that right now as well. In 2050, CMAP has suggested the population could grow to above 200,000 people. Within the phase one, we looked at the historical water use patterns throughout the community to determine what the usage was per person. We could then apply that to the population growth to come up with the future demands. And if you recall, we ran that a couple different ways. We did it based on the current trends, again, consistent with near recent water use throughout the community. And then we factored in water conservation practices that we thought were reasonable and came up with a less resource intensive water use projection. The main line or two lines on this chart that really want you to focus on are the red lines. So the red lines are the maximum day demand. The wells within the system essentially need to be able to meet that maximum day demand. So the highest water use in any given year, which oftentimes the day before and the day after are pretty high too, but you need to have supply that's able to meet that maximum day demand, whether we're focusing on current trends, less resource intensive, or somewhere in between. Give you an idea of how the city's wells are situated throughout the community. The city has 26 wells that they depend on as their source of supply. 5 of those wells in the northeast quadrant, as indicated by gravel, 101 through 105 are shallow sand and gravel wells, so less than a couple hundred feet. And then the remaining 21 wells that have a D after the number are the deep sandstone wells down into, most of them into the Ironton-Galesville Formation overall. The city has 11 water treatment plants, so some of the wells come to its own individual treatment plant, and in other cases the water treatment plant has multiple wells coming to it. I want you to focus a little bit on the very west end of the city where it shows the Black Road water treatment plant, and that's one of the instances where several wells are coming to the plant overall. In fact, 6 wells are treated there. The other item to point out on this exhibit is the location of the Sandwich Fault. We have talked about that a little bit in the past. It is a true fault, meaning the geology on the west side does not line up with the geology on the east side. It's approximately 200 to 300 feet in difference. So the geology on the west side is actually 200 to 300 feet higher than it is on the east side. You'll notice that if you look where the fault is, or where it's thought to be, ultimately knowing exactly where it is based on limited knowledge is something that can't be for sure, but based on the knowledge from the Illinois State Geological Survey, that's where it's estimated. All of the city's wells are located on the east side or north side, depending on northeast side of that fault, and ultimately then again the geology is deeper on that side. There certainly are some wells west of the fault. In fact, some of the communities to the south and west of you have some wells that are west of the fault. But it's important when we're planning out if we need to put in any new wells where it might be in orientation to that fault. There's some indication based on the modeling, for instance, that west of the fault, due to lower demands, water levels are higher and could be more sustainable now and into the future. Again, kind of technical here relative to the overall discussion, but we think it's important to talk about this a little bit so that you can get in your mind what we're talking about when we're talking about things like specific capacity. The graphic to the right just shows you, generally a cross-section of a well. If you can imagine that when a well is just sitting there and it's not being pumped, then the water level will be at a certain elevation, and that is often referred to as the static or non-pumping level. When the well is turned on and starts to flow water, depending on the efficiency of the aquifer and being able to get that water to the borehole, will determine how far the water level drops. overall. And that overall drop, which is typically in 360 degrees from the well and in 3 dimensions, would be the cone of depression. After the well is essentially stabilized or near stabilized, depending on how the aquifer is set up, that would be the overall drawdown, so from static water level to pumping level in that well. And then a parameter that's often used to determine the efficiency of the well is the specific capacity. So it's simply taking the flow rate from that well divided by the drawdown. So if you had a really high producing well that had limited drawdown, the specific capacity would be quite high. Whereas if you had a very large drawdown based on a lower flow rate, then the specific capacity is low. If you have a lower specific capacity, generally the aquifer isn't as efficient getting the water to the hole. That could be subject to the aquifer as it goes away from the borehole, or it could actually be at the surface where the water is trying to get into that borehole. It could be clogged up overall. And we're going to talk about well development techniques that can help improve the overall specific capacity. Again, the goal here is to continue to use the city's existing wells for the next 10 years as the primary source, as well as the backup source, likely in the future. So one of the main things we looked at in this table, I realize it's a little hard to read here, but in your technical memorandum, presumably it is much easier. We tracked the specific capacity when it was originally drilled, and then looked at it what it is current to see if there's a big difference, and to identify wells where we might be able to improve the overall specific capacity. Because if we can improve the specific capacity, then the drawdown is less, and the room above the top of that aquifer is more, and there could be situations where it could actually improve the capacity of the well if you affect it sufficiently. Also on this table, we've identified what the depth is from the top of Ironton Galesville. We've color-coded that. Overall, red being a little bit more of a concern, or below normal. For instance, there's the well on there, which if I'm reading that correctly, I can't actually see it, 21D I think it is. That's the dark red where it's starting to close in on top of the aquifer. And lastly, on here, we've shown the last well rehab as well as the previous well development that's been done at those wells, so that we can use that to determine what level of well development might make sense with the wells, again, over the next 10 years and presumably beyond. Last year, the city invoked a program to, they already were tracking water levels. They took it to this next level as far as creating dashboards and updating it on a monthly basis. Essentially, these hydrographs are looking at the static water level and pumping water level in the wells. Previous schematic showed you, and then also how that is relative to the Ironton Galesville, so that they can use that, continue to manage the wells again for the next 10 years, as well as they can see the effectiveness of the well development that is being planned. So well development, the technical memo, if you did read it and it didn't put you to sleep and got all the way through it, there are several well development techniques that can be, it didn't put these guys to sleep?
No, we didn't send it out.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Technical memo is still under review and heading towards final completion overall. So the well development techniques that will be in that are, as listed there, the hydraulic jetting, chemical treatment, and block shooting, based on the condition of the wells and the need to maintain water levels. We are leaning in the direction of focusing on block shooting for the overall well development. And the goal, again, is to increase the specific capacity so that we can maintain those water levels above the top of the aquifer. The plan, the typical plan for communities is to rehab their wells every 7 years, which the city is on that or even better than that currently. So within it, we are going to identify an implementation plan to establish the number of wells, or identify exactly which wells would be rehabilitated as well as developed throughout that time frame. Being more proactive will certainly be better than being reactive and having to deal with wells going out on an emergency basis. Lastly, again, the city will continue to monitor and track those wells to determine the overall timing. For instance, if they see that water levels are significantly decreasing in a well, or there's challenges with flow rate or whatever it may be, then that can slide up in the schedule. So the well development, or well rehab and well development schedule will certainly change over time. When evaluating if you have sufficient supply to meet demands, it's ultimately, okay.
You had 7 categories up there for maintenance or to develop the wells. Could you just run through what those are? I'm not familiar with block shooting and air blast, that kind of thing.
I was hoping somebody was going to ask that.
You're the only one.
So hydraulic jetting is often used when you first drill the well. Most of the time you need materials to drill the well, bentonite for instance, to be able to bring the cuttings to the top. Essentially the process is to lower a tool that has jets on the bottom of it, and then you pump water from the surface down into it, and then you move the tool up and down inside of the borehole to jet the formation and be able to get the materials off. Chemical treatment is the installation or the injection usually of either a strong acid or a strong base, depending if you have some chemical buildup down in there that's blocking again the formation. When you bring that to the surface though, you have to stabilize it, and for the city's wells, other than maybe the shallow sand and gravel, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I should have said with hydraulic jetting it certainly makes sense when you first drill the well, but based on the city's needs moving forward, it's not probably appropriate or will not show a lot of improvement at this time after the well's been in service for quite a while. The air blast and bore blast are similar to the jetting, but instead of using water, it uses air and one of them uses nitrogen. The other one just uses straight air, where you have high pressure down into a tool that injects that air into the formation, again, to try to break off the face of the formation somewhat, to get the material off. There could be some bacterial growth down there to pull that off again to improve the efficiency. The block shooting is done in many different ways. There's block shooting, there's double block shootings, there's double block shooting, and then there's bulk shooting. And that relates to how much explosives, hence the TNT image on this. So if you were not aware, that actually a form of well development, and quite frankly, this is our recommendation for a lot of your wells, is to have a controlled setup where you put explosives down inside of the well. They're typically strung on a line or a fuse that is intentionally set up. For instance, you might put 1 pound every 5 feet or 2 pounds every 2.5 feet, which is the double block shooting, within the formation that you're pulling the water from. You bring that to the surface, you literally light the fuse or set it off, and then the explosives will go off inside of the well. It will fracture this hard sandstone in most instances inside of the well. The face of it will drop down inside of the well overall. There have been instances even in Joliet's wells where thousands of pounds have been used. In our suggestion, we're thinking the hundreds would make sense. Through that well development, then by again breaking the bedrock, you're able to improve the efficiency. Now that, or after you've done that, the stability of the formation is certainly weakened, which is kind of what you want because it improves getting water to the hole, but it also, then you have all this sand in the well that you need to get out. So the airlift surging is basically to get the sand out, creating an airlift pump essentially, and putting the well under pressure, releasing the pressure, and then it brings the sand into the borehole, and then you what is called bale the sand out of the bottom of the well, so that when you put the well in service, your chances of pumping sand are minimized overall. Again, you want to improve the efficiency of getting water there, but you want to stabilize the formation. Is that sufficient? There we go. So as stated, one of the big questions is, well, how many wells do we need to meet the demand? The city has, again, 26 wells. To think that 26 wells are going to be in service 100% of the time is probably a little unrealistic. So you have to start thinking from a risk perspective, what makes sense and what kind of demand are we trying to meet. And as stated earlier, the maximum day demand is the focus. From a regulatory perspective, the document that basically establishes what is needed from the state of Illinois' perspective, the 10 state standards, they define the firm capacity as the minimum. So you would need to meet the maximum day demand with the largest well out of service as the minimum regulatory requirement. That's very commonly used from a source perspective, it's very commonly used from a pumping system perspective. So, if you need 3 pumps to meet that maximum day demand, you put a 4th one in just in case one of those pumps goes down. Well, when you start to get more and more components that are required to meet that overall demand, then you start to question, well, is there a chance that more than one well could be out of service? And in talking with city staff, as proactive as they are, there have been times when more than one well has been out of service. Well, if the maximum day demand hits when that second well, for instance, is out of service, you may not be able to meet the overall demand. So we're going to show you a graph in a second as to how that relates to the demands, but ultimately that will program in as to when your next well should be drilled, or it's recommended to be drilled. But the firm capacity is 27, MGD 27.2, and what we're calling the total modified firm capacity is 25.6. This graph then marries up the water demands along with the firm capacity lines from a time frame perspective, so you can start to identify when it might make sense for a new well to be added. The dark blue line to the left there is the historical maximum day demands from 2012 through 2017, and all the dashed lines from that point forward would be the projected maximum day demands that were completed as part of the phase 1 study. The current trends is the uppermost dotted line. The less resource intensive is actually on there. It's a little bit light. Perhaps on your computer screens you can see it on the projection to the right here. You can see it. The left is a little bit harder to see. What was decided, and remember that the less resource intensive demand is based on a certain level of water conservation throughout the community. The Water Conservation Subcommittee is certainly doing a great job from an education perspective, getting the word out, but it's going to take a little bit of time for that to probably really take hold overall. So we came up with a water demand projection that's essentially in between those, the average of the current trends and the less resource intensive that we think is probably most feasible in the very short term. Again, because maybe water conservation isn't taking place as much as we would want, or it doesn't ramp up as quickly, you might want to look at the current trends demand. The other 3 lines on there, the first one, lowest one being the orange or lighter orange one, is your modified firm capacity. So remember that line was if there were 2 wells out of service, that would be your maximum, or that would be how much you can produce from a supply perspective. The orange middle one is your firm capacity, so that's 1 well out of service, and the top one is your total capacity. Again, from a risk perspective, wherever the demand crosses the firm capacity is what defines when a new well might be needed. Yes, sir.
You want questions to come?
Sure.
Okay. At the last meeting, when Joe presented the cost of water and presented the options of going to DuPage, Chicago, all the little graphs, all the pipe we would need, why was the Michigan site at Hammond being estimated at 26 million gallons per day when your chart here shows 4 million, 3 million more a day? Why wouldn't that be estimated at these levels and not at the lower levels?
So my understanding is the demands that we're using as part of the phase 2, the maximum day demands for Joliet only is 30
Right.
MGD, and that would be for any of the 5 alternatives.
Right, okay, well, I'm real sure when Joe said he was estimating the Hammond sites, 2 sites over there, that was being estimated at 26 million gallons a day for pump or intake. It seems to me that the both figures should coincide. And I asked you a question at that meeting about that.
I'll have to check. If I did, I misspoke. 30 MGD is the design capacity for all
Whether
of
it's
the
Lake
alternatives.
Michigan or whether it's our wells.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And just to clarify for anybody, the 30 MGD is the 2050 demand. So essentially, we're just talking the next 10 years up to 2030. So if you follow these lines all the way out to 2050, it will project out to the 30. So just looking at this exhibit again, where do the demands cross the lines? Well, if you look at the average maximum day demand, again, the middle dashed line, generally it's stating that a new well would be needed in the very near future. If we focus on the current trend, same case, if we're using the firm capacity overall as the goal, or I guess what our overall capacity of the system would be, then it would be around 2026, where that current trends line crosses the firm capacity. Again, that's when one well is out of service. If a new well were to be put into the system, ideally it's in a location where a treatment plant already has capacity, and it turns out that the Black Road water treatment plant does have existing capacity. There's actually an extra HMO treatment vessel there that would be able to treat this new 31D. You do want to have some level of separation of that well from the other wells so that when you're pumping them together, there isn't interference. Based on this current location, we're suggesting you could possibly get west of the Sandwich Fault, which I indicated earlier could be a good thing as far as water levels and overall capacity and sustainability of that well. The well would need to be piped back to the treatment plant so it could be treated there and then sent into the system. There are some minor improvements that are needed at the treatment plant, but overall it has pretty good capacity. Yes, sir?
2 questions. You shocked me at July 30th at our little table when you said the words, "It depends," in relation to the wells. I've heard it said multiple times, 100 times over the last year, that we want to keep our wells as backups. Okay, we have 26 wells, not are all deep wells. Okay? How do you formulate a plan? And if you don't have the answer now, that's okay. But how do you formulate a plan on what wells you keep? Is it based on production? Is it based on location? Is it based on age or other factors?
All the above.
Okay, fair enough. And this site on Black Road, there's got to be a legal rider put on that the Joliet police and the Shorewood police cannot use that as a radar trap to hide their cars, their squad cars, and run the radar gun. We should make that clear. That's an excellent spot when you're driving down there.
Okay.
Anyway.
Understood. But yeah, to your first question, I mean, those are all items that will be evaluated. Certainly, if a treatment plant locally is part of the equation, what wells can you get there effectively? Which ones are cheaper, which ones are just a bridge too far, and then maybe it doesn't make sense to keep those. In this particular location, all of these existing wells, 6 wells, come to a common point. So you've got a lot of supply here that it would make a heck of a lot of sense to integrate in the future as well.
And where's the common point?
The common point is that Black Road water treatment plant, the red plus there, because that's where all the wells get treated before it's put into the system.
All 26?
No, just the
West
6
side.
that are shown on this map currently, and then 31D, the new well would come there as well. And then you could run a raw water transmission line from that point to potentially a treatment plant. Or you could, if you're doing a Lake Michigan alternative, you could essentially pump into the system from that particular location in an emergency. So the timing of the well, again, overall, it's looking at risk. So, if you look at it from the modified firm capacity, essentially what we're suggesting is it's something to get in the mix as soon as possible, because the historical demands have suggested that they could spike to levels where, and if 2 wells were out of service, it may be needed overall. An alternative to that is to be super committed to water demand management. For instance, if you're seeing as the community water levels go up, a second well goes down, if you're able to immediately enforce watering restrictions or prohibition altogether, you're able to then send folks throughout the community to enforce those restrictions overall, then you may be able to maintain the demands low enough overall. It's a balance. Do you want to take that risk, or do you want to put the investment in to the system with this additional well? If the demands exceed the supply, what happens? Well, what happens is the water levels in storage, the waters in your water towers will come down, and it could ultimately get to the point where pressure will start to drop. And quite frankly, if it continues and you're not able to reduce those demands, then people could be out of water. If it gets to the point where water pressures were to drop below 20 psi, then there would have to be a boil order across all of the system in order to basically use whatever water is in the system and then you would, obviously get the well back online and then charge the system back up, and you would have to continue to maintain that boil order until you get passing samples. The other part of the equation is in addition to suppressing, water use, is the non-revenue water, or potentially water leaks and water main breaks. We've talked about that several times at these meetings. So the city is certainly committed to fixing the leaks and fixing the water main leaks and tracking that overall. So that will be part of the overall equation, is to continue to track that and see if that's ultimately changing and can push the need for a new well out in time. Based on the firm capacity, again, the regulatory requirement, the graph shows us that 2026 is the time frame. And then again, the city has tools in place already to monitor things from the well perspective. Also want to look at growth, where the demands are going overall, and continue to factor that in. The cost, we have generated cost, and when you see the memo, you'll see it laid out there per year, and currently it's estimated in 2019 dollars for 2019. We have actually put an inflationary level on it so that the numbers that are out in time are inflated based on 3% inflation. But the annual cost for the city to do the annual rehab on the wells, again, to maintain them at a level of service overall is over $1 million. Currently, even the city is spending that, and for communities of your size, that's pretty common. It will vary later in time after a lot of this well development is done. It will presumably reduce down to less than $700,000 or in the $600,000 range. The new well and well house is summarized there overall. This is a well that's 1,300 feet deep. It requires, three-phase power, high horsepower motor, etc. So 4.6 million for that. We have the water main that brings it back to the treatment plant, which is about 2.7 million. And then, like I said, there's some minor improvements required at the water treatment plant, which is about 250,000. But that's pretty cost effective to be able to bring that supply into that treatment plant and then be able to distribute the water out into the system. So with that, any other questions? Got one behind you.
Can you go back to your slide that shows...
Bruce, can you come to the microphone, just for the televising?
I don't get all these questions he's asking.
Can you go back to your slide that showed usage over time? That one, right there. Why is the slope so steep between 2018 and 2020, and then once you get beyond that spot, it really levels off? Is that is there something going on that we don't know about? Or? Okay.
So when we did this analysis, we looked at 2012 to 2017 overall, and came up with essentially an average of the use across those 3 years, those 6 years. And then we applied it to the population overall that was the existing and then out into the future. So when we're looking at that, you have to take into account, essentially seasons or different years. 2015, for instance, had a higher water use than 2018, and that's because it was a drought year. So when we factored in moving out in time, we wanted to get to that point for that max day to average day ratio, along with the population that was there to be able to have a good projection that we can depend on moving forward. In 2016 and 17, they were pretty wet years, so the demand was suppressed. This year ultimately could be a bit of a drought year, so it could pop right back up. Again, we wanted to take that into account overall so that the starting projection was consistent with the historical levels.
Thank you, Jeff. I think the main takeaway is I think it's hard to think about spending money on additional wells when we're looking to switch water sources, but we have to be prepared for potential growth in Joliet. So it's looking at being proactive to make sure that we're prepared in the short term to maintain the consistent water supply. Okay, the next agenda item is the selection of independent cost review engineering firm. We've talked about this for the past couple of months. The intent is that given the significance of the cost information to the decision-making process, it's important that that information be as accurate as possible. A lot of conceptual components to the cost estimating, so having another set of eyes that's independent of the process look at it is in the city's best interest. So we published the request for qualifications June 20th. It was available to for anyone to respond to. We had 4 firms indicate that they would be interested in submitting. However, we only received 2 proposals by the due date of July 18th. In following up with some of the firms that didn't submit, it was more of a strategic decision on their part about accepting risk for a not very high cost value proposal. So we received 2 proposals, and the selection team met on Friday, August 2nd to review those proposals. The selection team consisted of myself, Amy Wagner, and Nick Gornick, and then Commissioner Hertko and Commissioner Horn. I don't know if either of you would like to discuss the results of that, or I can continue.
It was really pretty simple. I mean, you had a big firm and a small firm. It was partially the way I looked at it. The big firm has more resources to do the job. The small firm doesn't.
Okay. So the proposals we received one from CDM Smith and one from Greeley and Hansen, and the recommendation from the selection team was to instruct CMT to enter into a contract with CDM Smith. Okay.
That was it.
That was it. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Okay. I guess the next item then is the Water Conservation Subcommittee report.
All right. So the Water Conservation Subcommittee met a couple of weeks ago in July, and we discussed the July 21st event and what we can do if there is a subsequent event. We also talked about the increase in the water barrels, the rain barrels, as well as trying to promote more of the low-flow toilets and that rebate. We also talked about some outreach specific to certain populations such as children, and then potentially doing some more marketing around a conservation challenge or some additional items that we can be doing. We always recommend we suggest and would like to invite everyone to come and give us your ideas on how we can get to that LRI, and we're not designing for that CT. And so hoping that we could be doing some other initiatives throughout the year, working with our PR firm, and then of course with the city. Amy, anything you want to add? All right. So that brings us to any new or old business.
Old business? Start?
Yeah, please.
Commissioner Biley, many months ago, you brought up an intriguing topic that stuck in my mind, and I congratulate you for it. And I'm not that familiar with climate change and integration of climate change. And it surprised me that a town the size of Wilmington, Illinois, 5,700 people, completed a 30-year assessment. So let's look at the steering committee. The Illinois State Climatologist, many members of the Association of State Floodplain Managers, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, the Institute for Sustainable Communities, the Metropolitan Planning Council, the University of Illinois, the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant and Midwestern Regional Climate Center, and the University of Illinois at Chicago. This was funded by NOAA, the National Association of Atmospheric Administration, Housing and Urban Development, Illinois Department of Transportation, the Chicago Community Trust, Local Technical Assistance, and the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, CMAP. It was recently adopted by the governing body of Wilmington. And a portion of this is the integration of climate data. And it occurred to me that Joliet, for many decades, has had land on the Kankakee River in close proximity to the city of Wilmington, and possibly be a site to draw water. And I looked at this, and a portion of this deals with climate vulnerability assessment. Now, this is not going to happen tomorrow, but it's like many of the things we speak about. And one of their findings is that the city of Wilmington withdraws its drinking water from the Kankakee River. Surface water sources, such as the Kankakee, are more resilient than groundwater aquifers, but may be vulnerable to drought, flooding, and algae blooms. And I draw everyone's attention to that algae bloom because there's been numerous articles online and in the newspapers concerning dogs going into ponds with the green algae, and that produces a cytotoxin and the dogs die. So I directed a question to the lead author of this report and said, if Joliet were to put a water intake in close proximity to Wilmington on the Kankakee River, would these same vulnerabilities apply? And the answer was yes, they would. And I think this speaks to your issue on climate and the integration of sources, and I think it should be given to the team. Number two, perfectly clear, and it's not personal, it's business. I disagree with the assessment of the Dresden pool. I base that on science and the original studies that state that the true Illinois River begins 9 miles downstream towards Morris, because there's no homogeneous mixing of the Kankakee and the Des Plaines. Total two different bottles of water, total two different bodies of water. So, to accept the fact that we could put a intake line in the Dresden Pool, and assuming that all the laboratory values come back, and assuming that there's this mixture, how would we react here at the city of Joliet when the nuclear Dresden station releases 750,000 gallons of radioactive water into the Kankakee River? And if the theory is that this all mixes with the Des Plaines, then I have to make a conclusion that anything radioactive would be sucked into our treatment intakes. So this happened in 2009, it happened in 2014, and I would like to see the team address this issue. How would we protect our water supply when there's this nuclear water 160 times more radioactive than the allowable limit for groundwater? So I would like to submit that to the team. My second one here, if I may, I have copies for the commissioners. Bruce, you seem to be liking to get up and down a lot. Could you pass these out, please? Give me extras. It occurs to me that, oh, and we got them up here, but the people in the crowd. It occurred to me that from what Teresa said and Jeff said and talking about this Dresden Pool, how could I demonstrate this? And we know that the Kankakee River is heavily laden with silt, pesticides, and herbicides. And we know that the Des Plaines River is heavily laden with effluent from the metropolitan waste in Chicago, okay? So I had to go upstairs. And by going upstairs, I had to go to the satellite. And so this is a satellite photograph of the Dresden Pool, the Kankakee River. Now, if you hold the arrow up that says Morris, you know, that's the way the river's flowing, okay? And if you look in your left-hand corner and you see KKR, that's the Kankakee River, and I put a couple arrows showing the direction of flow. And then down towards the middle, I just put a D for the Des Plaines, okay? I received a letter from the USGS discussing this, okay? And it indicates that there is no mixing of a homogeneous nature. There's no even mixing. So we can send someone out there in a boat to the same site, the same GPS coordinate, and take water samples, and they will differ on a daily basis. Now, seasonally, where you see the Kankakee River is so light gray because of the sediment that is in it, during the wet season, that will expand its width, okay? And during the dry season, that will shrink its width, and the dark there, the black, that is the effluent in the Des Plaines River, will expand its width. So when you put a fixed intake, it's going to vary to a great degree. And when the radiation was released, the radioactive water was released from Dresden, that traveled all the way down to Morris. So I think these are considerations that should be given to selecting a site. And then lastly, published today in Science Daily and published online on weather.com are two articles that basically are identical to what I reported with the USGS report last month. Now, the University of Illinois issued a press release, okay, and they described the Dresden Pool as a toxic soup. And they piggyback on the USGS report that the water's too toxic for the migration upstream of the Asian carp. And they got pretty technical here, and I like getting technical because Jeff does a lot of technical stuff. I like that, okay? They've been doing DNA studies on this carp post-mortem, and it indicates that in order to accommodate this water, the carp are having to activate genes as part of what they described as working overtime in the detoxifying pathways to basically live in this water. So I think these are all good topics for the committee to discuss and evaluate and recommend, give their recommendations. And Madam Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Hurtko. Does anyone have any comments or any other new or old business? All right, any other public comments? All right, then do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
No, roll call? No. Okay.
All right, thank you.
So like we bonded.
You know what? See,